everybody! Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about some exam tips and tricks for your FSAs coming up, and how to handle the stress of all of it, because at least for many of us, standardized assessments can be a very stressful time of the year. But hang in there, almost there. Alright, let's get started. So my first tip would be, you want to make sure that you eat a very good nutritional breakfast in that morning. There's nothing worse than sitting an exam and having your stomach rumble as you daydream about Cheez-Its. You don't want that happening. So make sure you eat a good breakfast that'll fill you up. Last thing you want to do is skip breakfast. So some good ideas like maybe some fruit, some eggs. Your parents will know what you like. And then also make sure you get a good night's sleep right before the exam. You don't want to stay up really late and then wake up in the morning and be yawning on your way through that door. You want to wake up at the top of your game, full of energy, ready to go and powered up to take that exam. So you've probably heard those time and time again, but what can I say? Great minds think alike. All right, once you get to that exam, how to handle the questions. All right, so my first tip would be to read the questions first for that reading FSA. You want to look at the questions right underneath the passage and then go through and read the whole passage, because that way you know what you're looking for when you look at the passage. Now don't go through the whole section, of course, but just look at some of the questions that it's asking about that passage, like for the first passage, so that you know what you're looking for when you're reading the text. Alrighty, next, here we go. Go back to the passage when you're answering your questions. So a lot of times questions on the FSA, and you've probably seen this before, they'll ask you in line 5, and then they'll ask a question, or they'll refer to a specific character or an event that happened in the reading. So when in doubt, don't just be guessing and saying, oh, I think that's what happened back there. I think if you're not sure, you have the passage right there. So make sure you look at the passage, you see, oh, yep, okay, and you look at the lines so that you know what's going on. That's especially helpful when they have text support questions, so sometimes, not sure if any will come up on this one, but a lot of times on standardized tests they'll say, which line best supports this statement? So those questions, it's crucial that you go back and you read those lines so you know what they're talking about before you just choose an answer. Alrighty, next tip, here we go. Do what you can first and then come back to the ones that you're not so sure about. So I find personally that it's better to kind of get yourself on a roll of the stuff that you can do rather than focusing on the stuff that you can't do right off the bat. And that kind of, I know you go into the test, and a lot of times you're going into that test nervous, and it's really not fun to look at a question and say, I'm not so sure about this one, and then start doubting yourself. So if you're not sure about the question, definitely don't just skip it right away, but read the question all the way through. And if you think, this one's going to take me a bit of time, I'm not really sure, move on. You can put a little star or a little dot next to that question so you know to come back to review it, and then move on to the ones that you feel confident about, because that'll get your confidence up, make you feel a little bit less nervous, and then maybe when you look back at that question, now that your nerves are settled down a bit, maybe the answer will seem more obvious to you. Alright, so that's a very big important tip. Don't spend all your time on one question that you're having a hard time with, because getting one question wrong isn't going to kill your score. You can get a question wrong. Of course, try to get the questions right, but if one question is really stressing you out, don't be afraid to move on and come back to it. Okay, next tip, here we go. Make sure you read all of the answer choices before you move on. So sometimes you'll look at a question and you see answer A and you're like, oh, yeah, it looks good, circle it. You don't want to do that. Make sure you read all of your answer choices, because sometimes you'll find a better answer choice just a couple choices down the line. So maybe C and A are both kind of correct, but C makes more sense and is more supportable than A. So you would want to go with C, but if you didn't read those answer choices, you might not have seen the better answer there. So just make sure you read all of them before you choose what you're going to put down. Alrighty, next one, here we go. like I was saying before, don't spend too long on one question, but that kind of ties in with this one. Make sure you check the clock every once in a while. Now, of course, I'm not telling you to be going, paper clock, paper clock. Of course not, but just make sure that you're keeping an eye on that time. You'll probably find that you have plenty of time. I know a lot of times we kind of underestimate how much time we have, but make sure that you are aware of how much time has passed. That way you don't get caught off guard when they say, all right, you have 5 minutes left. You don't want that to be a shock to you. So just make sure that every once in a while, maybe every passage or so, you just take a little look at that clock and make sure that you have enough time left. Because, and of course, don't just look at that and say, well, guess I don't have a lot of time left. If you don't have a lot of time left, maybe say, okay, I'm running low on time, I have to spend a little less time on these questions, or I'm running out of time, I really can't keep spending so much time on the ones that I'm having a hard time with. So just make sure that you kind of take that into account, how much time you have left and how much time you're able to spend on the questions. And they should tell you before the section how much time you have allotted for that section. And you can use that as kind of your guidance for how much time you should be spending on each passage and on each question. Doesn't mean you have to do any fancy mathematical calculations, but just keep an eye on the time. Okie doke. Next, make sure you're bubbling the right question. So sometimes when you decide to come back to a question, you leave it blank. So just make sure that then when you answer the next question, that you're putting it in the correct line. So the numbers on your little bubble sheet are going to correspond to the numbers in the little test. So just make sure that you're not putting answer number 2 in the spot for answer number 1, because then that would be marked wrong, because they don't know that that's what you were doing. And don't panic about that, of course. Just keep an eye on the fact that, okay, my answer to number 7 is going in the space for number 7. And if you do have an issue with that, sometimes, if you've made a few mistakes, it's better to keep checking, because then you can catch it early on and just go back and erase those lines and fill it out correctly. Also, make sure that you erase answers completely if you're changing your answer. That way it doesn't mark it as your intended answer. So just don't lightly erase and have 2 that look like they're bubbled in. Make sure you fully erase a wrong answer and then fully bubble in that correct answer. Moving on. Let's see here. If you have extra time at the end, make sure you go back and review. So don't just sit there twiddling your thumbs. You might want to, depending on how much time you have left, this is something that's different for every person, but if you have a lot of time left, you want to take a couple seconds, just kind of breathe in and breathe out, clear your mind a little bit, and then go back through and look at those questions that you're having a hard time with. So if you look at your answer sheet and you're like, oh man, I starred 5 questions on that first passage, but the rest of this looks good, you want to make sure you focus on those 5 questions when you're reviewing your answers. And if you have the time, the more questions you can review, the better. Sometimes when you're stressed going through the questions and you're not sure how much time you have and you're rushing, sometimes you miss things in the questions. So if you have the time for it, reviewing can help so much. And like I was just saying, make sure you read the question completely. I'm famous for doing this every once in a while, but sometimes we read questions and we're trying to speed through it, so we just kind of glimpse at the question and then try to figure out what the question was from the answer choices, and you don't want to do that. Make sure you completely and carefully read the question, then read the answer choices, consider the answer choices and what you know from the passage that you just read, and you can go back to the passage if you need it, like I was saying earlier, and then carefully choose your answer choice. So just make sure you're not skimming through those questions, because it's really easy to miss little things. Like if it says, which of the following is not an example of, you want to make sure that you don't go selecting the one that is an example of. So that can reduce stress a lot, because if you know that you understood the question, you will feel more confident about your answer choices. Awesome. Moving on. Okay, process of elimination. This is a big one. You guys may have heard this before. But if not, no worries. So process of elimination means that when you're having a hard time with a question, you want to cross off the answer choices that you know are wrong. Because if you start out with 4 answer choices, and you look and you say, well, there's no way it can be answer choice D, and you cross this one off, now you only have 3 answer choices left you have to choose between. It makes the question seem a little less overwhelming, and sometimes that helps narrow it down to 2, and it's a lot easier to pick between those 2 answer choices than to keep having to look at all 4, and every time you look at the question saying, which ones did I think were wrong again? So if you know that an answer choice is definitely not the one you're gonna go with, just put a little X next to it or cross it off, and that's called process of elimination. And that's good for any type of test, not just the FSAs, math tests, reading tests, anything in school. If you can just narrow down those answer choices that way. All right, better to guess than leave something blank. So you are on the FSA, they don't deduct points for wrong answers, but you can't get any points for leaving it blank. And personally, I think that a 25% chance is better than a 0% chance. And this kind of goes hand in hand with process of elimination, because if you've already eliminated 2 answers and you have to guess between those last 2 because you're really confused or you don't have a lot of time left, then you have a 50% chance of getting it right because you've narrowed it down and you know it's one of these 2 answers. So definitely, of course, don't go through guessing, but if you're stuck at the end and you really have no idea what the answer choice is, don't leave it blank. Make sure you bubble something. And then finally, I would say try not to second guess yourself. So of course I was saying go back and review, but trust yourself. Don't be doubting yourself because that just stresses you out more. So trust that you know you are working to the best of your ability and you've got this. Just when you're going back through, don't say, well, couldn't be what I said the first time. Make sure that you trust yourself and you do review your answers, but don't automatically second guess yourself. All right, that's pretty much what I have as far as tips go for the test questions. Just 2 other little tiny tips that I personally find helpful. Make sure that you are prepared walking into that test room. I like to always bring my own sharpened number 2 pencils because it makes me feel like I'm on top of things. Plus I can sharpen them to a very sharp point right there. But usually they will provide pencils in the testing room if one of your pencils breaks or you forget them at home. It's no biggie, but the more prepared you feel walking in, the less nervous you're going to be about taking the test. So bringing pencils or erasers, that helps me. And then the last one's a little odd, but a lot of studies have shown that having a mint or chewing some mint gum before an exam can improve your thinking, kind of help you focus. So if you have a mint or some mint gum and you want it before walking into the exam room, I tend to chew mint gum before big tests like the SAT because I find that it just helps me focus and relax a little bit. And of course, as you grow up, you're going to find the strategies that work best for you. These are just a few tips that I've shared, and if you don't think that one's very helpful for you, then of course, do it the way that works best for you, not the way that works best for me. These are just some suggestions. I wish you guys the best of luck on these tests. Don't stress yourselves out too much. You've got this. It's just another test. Try your hardest, of course, but in the long run, I know you guys are gonna do awesome on this test. All right. Have an awesome weekend, guys, and I will see you later.